of this sad time, my wife's journey through breast cancer by Carl D. Stephen. Forward. This is a story of my wife's fight with breast cancer and my role in that fight. Shortly after I finished writing this book in 2004, the Iraq War began. Most Americans have never experienced war personally, but every year breast cancer attacks more than 200,000 women in the United States alone. Fighting cancer is a lot like being drafted into a war zone. Your life is in danger and you didn't ask to be there. You'd better learn how to do certain things pretty quick or you'll die. And even some of the things assigned to fight for you can kill you if you're not careful. We had to learn a lot about breast cancer in a short time. If you or someone you love has breast cancer, I hope that reading about our experience can help you with yours. Chapter 1. Orphaned at 30. In 1971, I was 17. All I thought about then was circuits and electronics and cool stuff you could do with them. I hung out with a bunch of guys that liked to build machines that made 6-inch sparks and melted copper wires. Our gang's official name was Explorer Post 292. My father called it the Boy Scouts. Every so often, we'd go on tours of power plants and factories. That winter, we took a tour of the Texas Instrument plant in Dallas. The tour took all day. That night, I got home at about 8. When I got home, my father told me that my mother had cancer. I knew she was going in the hospital that day. I just decided to go on the tour instead of waiting around the hospital. They cut off her breast as soon as they found out it was cancerous. She didn't know any of this until she woke up after the surgery. My father kept a pile of Playboy magazines under the bed. My mother read them for the interviews. He looked at the pictures. This may have had something to do with my mother's decision to get large implants after her surgery. They failed. She went through several more painful surgeries. In 1979, the cancer came back. My mother started chemotherapy. By that time, I had married and was living in Atlanta, Georgia. My mother flew out from Texas and we took her to a restaurant in an old southern mansion. My wife took a picture of her and me on the front steps of the place. My mother is smiling a big smile, but she is stooped and shorter than me by a good 6 inches. 2 months later, I got a phone call at work. My father said if I wanted to see her again, to come back to Texas now. We got on a plane and went to the hospital. She was weak and had a vague-looking wig. We talked a little bit and then her mouth got dry and she sucked some water through a straw. We left the room. The next day when we came in, she was delirious. Her wig was off and the bare skull had some purple marks in it. We stayed at the hospital all day and into the evening. Around 11:30 that night she began to moan. Then she vomited some black blood. I ran out into the hall for a nurse. The nurse went into the room. A few minutes later, my father came out with his hands in his pockets. "She's gone," he said. She was 50. 3 years later, my father began to cough up blood. He had smoked all his adult life. His doctor took x-rays and found a mass near the center of his chest. He went into surgery. The surgeon found a tumor where the 2 main bronchia joined to form the windpipe. It was inoperable. His doctor believed he could last about a year. This was in March of 1983. The following March, we were living in Massachusetts where I had a teaching job. We made plans to visit my father during the spring break. I called him on a Saturday a week before the break. He sounded tired and said he wasn't feeling good, but he was scheduled to go in for some experimental surgery the following Tuesday. He said, "I'll either die or get better." On Tuesday, I was in my office working on the computer. It was snowing heavily. My department head, a man named Bob, knocked on the door. I let him in. He was accompanied by a colleague of mine, a kind-hearted, ageless sweaty, who said nothing. Bob said, "Your father had an operation today, and it failed. I'm sorry." No one but a doctor he didn't know that well was with him when he died. He was 57. By the time I was 30, I knew about as much about cancer as someone can know who hasn't lived around a cancer patient day after day and who hasn't had it himself. I found out later that that's not very much. When you watch somebody die, you don't learn much about how they lived. But I did learn not to put off going to see people I knew who had cancer. That is one appointment you cannot reschedule. Chapter 2. Pam and the Diving Pig. My wife, her name is Pam, which is short for Pamela. Her middle name is Lucy. Sometimes her father used to call her Pammy Lowe, and it embarrassed her. When she married me, she was glad to drop the Lucy and just be Pam Stephen. The old knight used to joust anybody who insulted the lady love. Jousting was sort of like a duel, only with horses and spears instead of guns. It was serious business. No knight worthy of the name would ever say anything bad about his own lady love. So I won't either, but she's human. She's real smart, like movies, old movies in particular. That's one reason I married her. She took life a little more seriously than most of the other women her age. We knew each other for 2 years while we were finishing college in different states. Wrote letters back and forth. One day when I was back in Texas working at a mobile radio factory, I picked her up in my white VW Beetle. We drove over to Dallas and saw the old Disney cartoon Fantasia. On the way back, we decided to get married. We never slept together before we got married. VW Beetles are not conducive to necking. We got pretty hot and heavy standing in her folks' hallway a few times. Eventually, her dad would find some excuse to come out in the hall and make some noise. I got the message. He kept his shotgun in the back closet, and he was the kind of guy who knew how to use it. I liked looking at women's bodies as well as the next guy. I liked looking at hers. We went swimming a few times before we were married. She wore a two-piece suit that gave me a good idea for what there was. Playboy wouldn't have her, but there are other things in life besides large breasts. Neither one of us knew what we were doing on our wedding night. She was very nice about it. When there's a will, there's a way. We kept practicing. We got better. I used to believe in magic. Here's what I mean. I believe that once you get married, no other woman would ever look attractive to you again. The strange thing was, I didn't know I believed this until I got married. The day after our wedding night in Waco, Texas, we drove to San Marcos. San Marcos is a small town halfway between Austin and San Antonio. There was an amusement park there called Aquarina Springs. The star attraction was Arnold the Diving Pig. We watched a pig dive into the springs. There was also a university there. We went for a walk in a public park. It was a warm day. Lots of young co-eds were walking around in miniskirts and tight tops. I still liked looking at them, just as much as the day before. What the hell, I thought. This wasn't working. I'm not supposed to like looking at other women anymore, but I sure did. I don't believe in that kind of magic anymore. Nothing is automatic about staying married. There's nothing automatic about fighting a bull either. Both take practice. And one is just about as hard as the other, but for different reasons.